All right, good afternoon, everybody. Make sure we're in the right room, right? We're talking about document generation here in Office 365 for the next hour or so. Just to get things started off, my name is Brian Cowie, so you can heckle me all you want. Basically work for a consulting organization that's headquartered up in Minneapolis called Avtech Solutions, and was able to go through the Microsoft Certified Masters program. In this session today, we'll really be going over various kind of document generation scenarios, what you actually get inside of Office 365 as it revolves around Nintex. We'll then look at a various kind of demo environment that we actually are going to be processing through two things in regards to document generation. One is the actual generation of said document, and then integration with it with DocuSign. And then we'll talk about various other types of integrations and what's coming down the pipe as it revolves around document generation in regards to Nintex. So when we really start looking at document generation overall, what are some of the various scenarios that we really want to start taking a look at? And the next few slides I put together just kind of a few sample kind of scenarios across various departments, but it's really meant to start getting you thinking about ways in which you can start leveraging the document generation activities inside of Nintex to really move your processes forward. So when you start looking at things like in finance and legal, if you're dealing with invoices and contracts and terms and conditions, we generally have a lot of these types of documents where we have information such as invoice numbers and contact information around who information is being sent to, maybe even financial data that's stored in other types of applications that we need to start generating and serving up this content to our customers or to our clients as things are going through. Or even things like statement of work, right, where we have various types of similar information, but we have maybe sound numbers and start dates and end dates and scope, that we're pulling information across various areas inside of our organization and maybe to separated systems. And we need to provide these documents to our end user base or to our client base in order to fulfill those as contractual terms. Other areas such as sales, right, for quotas and proposals. But one of the other nice things, so we think about Word documents and PDF documents a lot, but some of the document generation activities, we can also start thinking about how we put together maybe just some simple type of flows where we have maybe a presentation request. You have account executives or sales personnel that come in and say, you know what, I really need to provide a customized proposal or presentation to a client based off of Dynamics or Salesforce or maybe even a different segment inside of Office 365. And based on our business process decisions, that we can actually generate that document for them based on the various templates and other information we get throughout that process, to be able to provide them an actual usable PowerPoint presentation as things go through. And then human resources is another large department that, let's be honest, requires a lot of paperwork and a lot of signatures of things that need to basically happen from a formal nature. So things like what happens during open enrollment for signing off on things or needing to provide information to employees, absentee requests if you need a formal documentation around there, onboarding, skills assessments, where you need to personalize some of the information inside of these documents to the individuals that are really going to be involved, or even performance reviews for that matter. I kind of think a lot of us might be in the performance review season in the beginning of the year and needing to make sure that once again, if we're pulling information from a skills database or pulling information from a previous year's performance for goal setting and all that kind of stuff, to really have that continual process as things are going on. And then the last, at least, department that I'm at least hitting, IT and support, where if we need to actually grab metrics from a system to actually provide reporting on information that's going on, or even creating knowledge base articles if we're not doing it via the web or other kind of renewals, at least from that matter as well. So there's plenty of various types of scenarios across any and all organizations that we can actually deal with in order to provide consistent, repeatable natures to them in a way that we can actually utilize Nintex for that matter. So when we start looking at actual document generation inside of Office 365, where are we starting and what are we starting to work with? The first thing we need to ask ourselves are what kind of subscriptions are we based on? So out of the chute, If you're on standard, you basically get 250 document generations per your year cycle. Enterprise has kind of 500. Really, at least from my perspective, it's a get your feet wet, right, and get you hooked. As far as if you're going to go all in, you're going to really slam through those numbers really fast, right? So then they have all the additional add-ons that you can throw on top of it. If you need to do 6,000 or 12,000 or even more so, you have the ability to kind of add onto your existing subscription. Question? So the question for the recording is, does it really go against your trial or your quota if you're inside of the development mode? That I'm not sure on, but we can make sure to get an answer for that. I think it'll be based on, what subscription or what area that you're on, but we'll make sure to follow up on that. Because if all of a sudden you're starting to plow through a repeatable process, well, hey, here's another 1,000 that have been chewed up really quick. You want to make sure that that's taken care of. So understanding that it is this, subscription-based model and going in, and because it's actually overlaying on top of the draw loop, right, technologies that were basically involved, it's always going to be calling out to that other service. So at the end of the day, we're really talking this entire session about a general action inside of the actions pane inside of the Office 365 Nintex workflow. So inside of the listen libraries header inside the action itself, the document generation action really starts getting into various configuration actions that you need to take into account. So the first one is probably the most important as far as where your actual template document library is going to be housed. The biggest important part about both the template library and the output library is they have to exist inside of the site that you're actually running the workflow in. But then secondarily, you're starting to actually deal with the template that you're going to be providing mock-ups of the placeholder data inside of there to actually generate the document. Next is the output type, where you can either decide, like most people are going to, from a Word perspective, are just going to flat out drop it down into a PDF, but you have the ability to keep it inside of the same source document type. That's going to be really important, of course, for presentation templates or for Excel templates themselves, but even more so as we look on later for things that are kind of coming down the road, you very much might want to start populating it with data from other systems or for things inside of your actual business process itself, and then other human interaction may still be required after that before sending it to a more final type of format such as a PDF. And then being able to, of course, set the actual output name that's coming into place. So in this standpoint, setting up an actual sales quote, and then being able to preface it with the ID itself after the document is actually generated. So when we start looking at the template of the workflow action, the three different types that we can actually deal with right now are our main Office types. So Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. The majority of generation activities that we end up seeing are going to be against Word documents. It's kind of the first natural input into document generation, but keep in mind that those others are definitely available for you. The main reason for just those three types right now is it very much utilizes the Nintex Document Tagger add-in into Office. But the big thing about when you're starting to work with that actual add-in is all of the data that you want to inject into your actual document needs to be stored inside of an Nintex variable inside of your workflow. So even if it's pulling information from another activity, you actually have to save that into an actual variable. So things like date fields and whatnot, you need to make sure that are there. So when we start looking at the actual document tagger itself, basically on the right-hand pane inside of your Outlook client itself, the tagger comes up and will start showing all of the variables that are basically available inside of the workflow at the time that you're actually opening up the document itself. So in this case, I have things like customer name, the contact, the street address, and so on. But then your document markup itself starts looking like this. So as you choose an individual variable and you specify, okay, I want to inject that inside of this individual document itself, it basically puts the double brackets and all that kind of stuff in place. Utilizing the document tagger add-in is what provides Nintex the ability to actually inject that data in. So you need to make sure that you're not just typing those fields inside in place. The kind of native place to start looking at injecting this data into is, I'm assuming a lot of you have probably utilized, Word documents and whatnot with word parts, at least in the past, where you're injecting, metadata that you've actually tagged onto the documents themselves. What this just goes that further step where you can actually have your business data, provided based on the actual process itself, help inject that data inside. The other thing that's nice about this is we've also had the issue of not being able to have that document information panel now anymore inside of Office 2016, as well as not being able to have any of those kind of word parts inside of Excel before as well. So these give us the ability to really, like I said, smartly inject data into your documents based off of the actual process itself. So enough talking in general. Let's go ahead and at least show a generalized demo, at least as far as what's going on. So just the baseline operation here. We're basically inside of an Office 365 site here for finance and legal. And what we've ended up doing is we have a kind of statement of work process where what I basically have ended up doing is created a site workflow to basically start things off where it's basically just going to ask some very generic information in the beginning to get the process started. So if I go ahead and start the generate statement of work process itself, it's going to ask me for, what is the sound number that I basically need to have in here. So something I simply type in. If I go ahead and also say it's going to be for Contoso, let's say that the effective date itself is going to be for tomorrow because we're going to send it on over. We're going to start it up maybe the beginning of next month, and it's going to go through the rest of the year, right? And for this standpoint, we're just going to say that for the scope that we're going to be able to inject in there as well, this is a sample scope from InspireX. So if I go ahead and just get this started, at the end of the day, this is really just going to start off the document generation site workflow that I basically have going on in here, and wanting to show you at least a few things that are happening where we're going to be pulling information across a few different areas to make the injection of data a little bit more intelligent. And I can also show you how the actual document itself has been tagged. So when this is done, it'll actually end up basically throwing a document down here in the main document library workflow itself. And this shouldn't take long. No, it really shouldn't take long. All right. So, and let's try to just at least make this at least a little bit bigger for those that are going on, at least as much as we can. So, we're setting a bunch of different workflow statuses. Like I said, since everything is based on the variables and workflow variables, so things like wanting to make sure that I'm, capturing the actual today variable if I want to inject some date in there, and of course troubleshooting for all the log stuff that's going on. But what I'm also doing in here is based on the client name that I actually specified in our initiation form, I'm actually using that data to actually query Salesforce to basically get additional address information that I'm actually also going to inject in the actual document itself. So as long as I get something back from Salesforce, which I'm pretty sure I have Contoso set up in there, what I'm basically going to be able to do is loop back through all the values that are in there and get things like the street address, the city, state, and zip, just to show you from an example perspective of some of the data that's coming back. Once I have that in place, we're actually going to start the actual document generation activity. Now with this, I'm basically pulling my Word document itself from my document templates library that's sitting there, and I have it just called contract template. I'm going to dump it out as a PDF into my main document library, and the name of the document in our perspective here is going to be Contoso-SOW, and then the actual sound number that I actually created during that actual initiation form. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at the template here. As long as Word will open, and of course will make me sign in again, because why wouldn't you? So now this is the general template for what's basically going on inside here. So you'll end up seeing that I've basically set it up with basically the sound number placeholder. Like I said, there's It's really just a block of the information that's in here, but this is that document tagger that I was talking about beforehand, where these are all of the variables that I basically have set up inside of the workflow itself to be able to automatically inject. So if I wanted to, right after client name here, let's say that I also wanted to, for some reason, inject something like the actual scope that was inside of there. By just selecting it from the tagger and hitting the insert tag, it dumps it in based on whatever the formatting at least was beforehand. So as we go down in here, I'll have things such as the client name. I have the effective date that we initially had in there. I have my start date, my end dates that are basically in place, and then the scope of work for basically what's going on inside of there as well. So if all is right with the world and everything ran successfully, I now have my Contoso SAO document that has our 4567123, because that was a nice random number, but it automatically pulled in my address information that I had specified inside of Salesforce, as well as a lot of the different date timestamps. Now, the one thing that I haven't been able to find a good way on, at least as of yet, is to be able to format dates in I'll just say a less desirable or a more desirable way, right? So being able to actually get rid and just make an actual date only, but being able to actually inject all of this data in here. Now, this was a very, very simple example, right? I'm putting in just some regular text. I'm grabbing some additional information out of Salesforce. But let's say that I also needed to have a table of all of my deliverables that might be sitting inside of an opportunity as well. I have the ability to actually inject all of that information once again into the same document to be able to make it an actual document that could be utilized from a contractual perspective. Question? The question was, am I using ISO conversion on my ISO standards on my date conversions? So what you're getting back, so all I'm really even doing inside, if you actually want to, because that was pulling directly from that initiation form. That was just, date, where you can even say, I want it to be date only. But you don't really have any other kind of, adjustments, I guess, that I've been able to at least do from that perspective. Or being able to say if I want it to be just date or date time, if you will, but good question. So that by itself gets us the actual document inside the actual the main library itself. That's all well and good. But now let's say that I want to take that integration another step further, and I actually want to integrate with Nintex and the DocuSign components, be able to actually push it out to DocuSign and start getting an actual signature out of it. So if I actually have my document here, I now have basically a list workflow on here to actually send this out for send DocuSign documents, so sending it out. Now, all I've ended up doing here is asking an actual name for whoever I want to send it to, and then the email address that I basically want the DocuSign email and process to actually start with. So setting up an alias for this so that you don't need to see everything that I have going on. So basically going to start at least this process overall. While this is going on, we'll also go ahead and spin up the kind of DocuSign workflow that's going on behind the scenes here as well, just to be able to see all the different components. Question? Yeah, so the question was, how does the document generation work if you have a multi-line of text field, right? So I don't believe it does any of the, the HTML markup or anything like that. Actually, that's one thing that we could even test out here, mostly because I've just been working with the various single line of text. But even as much as the initial scope document itself was, so when I initiated this scope generation, that was a multi-line of text field itself. So if I put in 5 lines, 10 lines, whatever it was, it should actually feed it all in the exact same way. So rich text, I think, I don't think it's going to bring you any of the kind of like bold or underlined or any of that kind of stuff, at least that I'm aware of. I don't believe so. Yeah.
Can you, does the document generation can we use repeating tables?
So in one of the, so for those at least in the back that can't hear, is can you use repeating tables at least inside of the document generation? Yes, there's actually a pretty good example of utilizing basically repeating tables that somebody actually has out in the Nintex blogs that I'll make sure that I get access to here. But their example actually was starting off even from a initial Nintex form itself that actually had kind of repeaters inside that form. Their specific example was being able to dump that out to an XML format that you can actually parse and go through for the actual generation activities to basically have a line per individual line item inside of the actual Word document itself as well. Now, after we get done with this and we talk about some of the future stuff, there'll be, I think, a lot of things a little bit easier for other stuff that's coming down the pipe. But so we'll definitely talk into some of that stuff here as well. So once again, the start at least of side of this workflow, monitoring a lot of things from a workflow status perspective to see what's going on, but then starting to actually deal with DocuSign and being able to send information that's going on in here. So a lot of the big things to take into account is DocuSign always needs to have an authorizing user to make sure that it's going to be able to be inside of there. I'm actually starting this off with the actual document itself that I'm dealing with. So the actual current document itself, but you can of course point it to some other place. And then what the actual destination file name that you're actually going to be working with, as well as who the recipient is going to be, not only from a name perspective, but also being able to send them, an email subject and the message that goes in through. The important thing to understand when starting to utilize DocuSign a little bit more is the envelope ID, so that if you actually want to be able to track the process and be able to see when certain things are done, is being able to start to utilize that in here as well. So this goes ahead and we'll kick at least that process off. Let's go ahead and see where we are. So right now it's already out there kind of waiting for signature. So right now it's kind of sitting inside of this loop where I basically have the workflow that's continually checking to see if basically there has been a response or not. So if I come back in here, this is my destination where I'm actually getting the email that says, hey, I actually have something that I want you to view. I go ahead, jump out to actually DocuSign itself. Yep, this looks like the document that I actually want to deal with. So even though I haven't created it from a template perspective, so once again, this has all the things like, yep, that's my address and these are the dates that we basically agreed upon. That's the scope, so that all looks good. So I basically come to the end. Now, if I set this up with the actual DocuSign templates, I wouldn't even have to drag this down and in here, but being able to go ahead, sign that out. Let's say that I also want to throw my title on there because that's fun. If I go ahead and finish this, that all gets finished inside of DocuSign. Then the actual workflow itself, will continue to loop on this. If it more than likely has hit the, hey, you need to kind of pause for 5 minutes, if you will, and then repoll to make sure that we have that data that comes back in later. But as soon as that's done, the loop itself is every time that it goes and actually queries DocuSign to see where the status is. So if it's completed, if it's been voided, if it's been declined, it's actually going to store that inside of the status of this individual workflow itself, and then utilizing the state machine functionality to be able to say, okay, if this is actually completed, then I'm going to go ahead and actually download the actual DocuSign document. Again, so if we look at this, yep, that's who I am. The biggest thing here is to make sure that we have our envelope ID that matched the initial ID that was specified when I actually sent it to DocuSign in the first place. So when we go to that, then basically wherever I'm going to actually save the document itself, and then at the end of the day, we basically finish that up. So what you'll also end up seeing here is with the actual send information that I also made sure to save the actual envelope GUID that basically got put in place on this actual item so that if I needed to use it from a documentation standpoint beforehand. But now we should at least be inside of the basically the downloading section as well, since the completed event has actually been registered. So it's basically kicking off the the actual download process itself, which will end up, if all is right in the world, is dropping it right in there for our fully executed document that's coming back from DocuSign that we actually started with a document generation process, so that we should be able to see the actual signature there inside the document itself. So I started off with a fairly generic Word document that was pulled in. I asked my individual to, just provide some high-level sample information. There was no approval or anything like that involved. But as soon as I asked for the client information, I pulled my, CRM record, if you will, to pull additional information that was based off of that individual, client to be able to inject into the document. Once I was able to then have that document reviewed maybe by my account executive and was ready to actually get sent off to the client, being able to integrate once again with DocuSign to be able to actually go, from beginning to end for the actual creation process it is with this entire kind of document generation perspective. Any questions on this one at all? Okay. So we will then hop back. We're actually running pretty fast inside of here, so that's actually not a bad thing. So then, as we look, we already started talking a little bit about some of the integration possibilities that are available through Salesforce and DocuSign from this matter. But we do have a few different activities that we can hit up. So CRM, at least for me, being a really important one to start supplementing additional data with content that's inside of there, and being able to continue a process that we already know is starting somewhere else. So if it's an opportunity process that's actually getting kicked off inside of Salesforce or Dynamics, to be able to get that process going. Obviously, we need to deal with content storage to be able to move content around. Maybe we're not just dealing inside of our SharePoint space. Maybe we need to move something out to Box or to Google Drive. We have a bunch of those different capabilities that are in place. And then, of course, e-signature, right? Sending it out, retrieving that formal document back from a signature perspective, or at least some of the integrations that I take a look at as it revolves around document generation. So when we look at, especially inside of Office 365 with Nintex, the two main ones being Dynamics and Salesforce really give you a lot of the kind of CRUD operations that you can do on records, as well as user management. Now, both of these inside of Office 365 do require that additional kind of Nintex store subscription, if you will. Right now, mine was able to get away with utilizing a trial for what's in there, at least for this event. But it's something to at least keep in mind if you actually need to not only retrieve information, but being able to update that information as well. So those are the Dynamics records, and of course the Salesforce type of activities that are involved, not only from a records perspective, but also chatter. So if you need to be able to, based on your actual processes and generating of documents, but maybe starting kind of chatter messages and whatnot that are involved around those. Different things that you have the ability to do pretty easily. And then content storage. We have a lot of basically, different sections that we can use, right? We don't just need to be able to use SharePoint from that standpoint, but if we need to, start a process to pull a document from a completely different area or to, move it up and in, this gets you around maybe I need to generate that document right from inside of the same site where my workflow is happening, but the outcome needs to definitely get pushed somewhere else based on where those final activities are. Other things to keep in mind, right? So from a OneDrive perspective, Office 365 overall, Google Drive, and Dropbox. Now, all of those are, once again, additional Nintex Store add-ins, but there are no additional subscriptions that are basically required for those, for what I could end up finding. Question? What about printers?
Sending a document to a printer.
So I haven't seen or dealt with any kind of the actions, at least for those, at least myself. Has anybody else run into anything to be able to work with there? So good question. I'm not sure what prize you win, but you win a prize. All right.
Are you talking about printing from the workflow? Yeah, have the workflow create the document and send it to
people just need that paper, right? Need to be able to see it. Question in the back.
Yeah, on the, I've done several things where I send documents to DocuSign, and the one problem I cannot figure out how to solve is the recipients who just absolutely insist on printing out the document, hand signing it, faxing it back. Have you thought of some creative solution to kind of plug that hole?
So no, unfortunately, but I understand where you're coming from. I mean, yeah, there are some of those people that are just like, no, this is going to be the way it is. We only deal with fax because, you know, we live in the 80s, whatever it is, or we're government entities, right? I mean, obviously needing to take that into account in some way, shape, or form, right? To be able to, you know, build some sort of a barge into the process where, you know, as I was doing my looping, waiting for the actual status of it to come back, you know, being able to have some sort of an override, right, inside of the actual process itself that says, oh, we received it manually, therefore, you know, go ahead and do this, you know, outside of the place. But particularly with, you know, faxes and all that kind of stuff is, you know, obviously figuring out different ways to be able to get that injection back in, right? There's a lot of kind of third-party utilities for, you know, fax to email, kind of a thing that you could then automatically upload and, you know, put into the process itself. But good question. So then lastly, to the whole DocuSign perspective, right? So the ones that I ended up using inside of the sample that I ended in there were, of course, the downloading of the document, the sending, and actually retrieving the status, but also being able to, you know, populate an actual template itself that has the automatic signature components and whatnot to be able to automatically send in there are nice and good as well. So DocuSign, of course, requires the actual add-in, but also requires that DocuSign account and a bunch of other things that kind of go into place along with that. Yeah?
When you're looping after you send a document up there, you're looping on DocuSign to do something.
Yep.
Are you checking for in progress or in process?
So it's the actual, so the statuses themselves here, let me flip back over. So inside of my loop here, so what I ended up doing for this is I initially set the status for in process, basically for the status of the actual, you know, initial thing basically going through. And then the loop itself is just saying, as long as it's still in process, right, basically go through. And then, you know, there are many various different types of states that can come out of there. The primary ones are just completed, declined, and voided, at least from one of the samples that I had before. So with all this, what's next and where do we end up going? So the document generation capabilities inside of online are actually fairly rudimentary. But what we actually have now as of December in on-premise is actually a little bit more robust, and we're starting to see what's kind of coming down the pipe. So these are basically the specific versions of Nintex that you at least need to have your environment up to if you want to start utilizing the document generation actions, both for 2013 and for 2016. But the nice thing about this is you can actually start with utilizing multiple document templates, right? So the Office 365 actions as they exist today, it's basically let me have a document generation activity tied to one document template, and I need to have all of my logic that's really based around that one individual template. But what we can do now, especially with the on-premise and coming soon to a theater near you, is to basically choose maybe different templates themselves to generate into a single document or a set of documents themselves. So if you're going to always start with a standard type of cover letter and you're always going to have, you know, general baseline information, being able to combine all of those together into a single output itself. Even more so when you're talking about like the repeating table stuff, there's significantly better table data support inside of, at least currently, the on-premise version itself, where you can specify the name, what your repeated type is going to be, and all the different columns and everything that are basically involved in there. It makes your life significantly easier from what I've been able to see, rather than having to parse through some crazy XML and dumping that stuff in there. So when I saw this one coming out a little while ago, it made me extremely happy for what was going on there, and then also sad because I was doing all of this inside of Office 365, and I'm like, what's going on? But then as well, a lot of other image stuff. So I mean, I think about a lot of contracts or invoices where you want to co-brand it, right? And being able to send in an image based off of maybe information that's coming on through. You have that ability to inject a lot more of that data into your documents themselves as you're going through from this perspective. So there's a good blog post that'll be obviously inside the slides for some of the new things, at least from an on-premises perspective. So that's all just for what you can at least do today for an on-prem. So what about Nintex Workflow Cloud? Not yet. We should hopefully be hearing something a little bit in the future, because it's definitely on the roadmap to start bringing document generation capabilities and having them similar across all areas of the actual Nintex workflow platform. And then lastly, from an Office 365 perspective, they're really trying to get to being able to start pulling in a lot of the new features that were in from an on-premises perspective, right? So being able to do a lot of those multi-template layers inside, I think is a huge win. Initially they really just wanted to make sure to start getting some of those document generation activities out there, to start thinking about the various types of scenarios and kind of engagement types that you might want to deal with from a generation standpoint. But make sure as you're getting into it, Word documents and normal kind of PDF documents are your initial thoughts and gateways right into document generation. But try to think about how else you may want to utilize that, or places that have had Excel questions on how you can start injecting more and more data into those actual documents, and even PowerPoints for that matter. I know for people like me who go out and have to yap in front of a lot of different people as well, being able to provide some of these general templates out there to be able to auto-fill them out and make them available is an extremely beneficial thing. So really, I know we are extremely early, but we'll open it up for the rest of Q&A, and we can actually test some of those other things, like the additional multi-line of text stuff. We can actually spin up a few of those things. But other than that, really starting to look at the various kind of activities that are involved, and being able to not just utilizing our stale data that are in our processes, but being able to extrapolate on that from various systems are really good things to start thinking about from a generation perspective. So with that, make sure that you fill out the session evals that are actually going on through the actual app itself. All that's in place. If you want to haze me, go ahead, do that on Twitter. I'll make sure any of the other questions that we basically have that's coming on up, we'll make sure to take those into account here as well, and we'll take a look at some of those other activities for some of the document generation stuff that's going on, or any other. If you have questions on querying against Salesforce to bring back some of that data, please let me know. That's what I got. Hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your afternoon here. Thanks for coming.